Chapter 5. Life After the Revolution. A Political Religion. The Ayatollah Khomeini ordered those who deserted the army in the name of the revolution to return to their military positions. He wanted to strengthen the country's fighting forces. I also returned to my army post to answer to his command. I discovered that I was the only person who ran away from the garrison during the revolution. This seemed to gain me a great measure of fame and respect among my co-workers. The revolution had caused a break in the chain of command so that the military suffered difficulties imposing disciplinary action and implementing normal decision-making. Officially, we were expected to obey the orders of our superior officers and commanders. But now, we received orders informally from the local mullah whose authority trumped that of the officers. The revolutionary mindset was to dismiss top army officials or condemn them because of their loyalty to the Shah. The mullah believed the structure and values of the army were not an acceptable reflection of Islam, and everything was now expected to align itself with the religion. I did little but preach Islam while in the army. I also learned that our colonel, Sayyid Shirazi, was a very religious Muslim man, but had managed to keep his religious life a secret before the revolution. It was dangerous for army officers to practice their religion openly while under the Shah's rule. Colonel Shirazi had been able to establish a strong relationship with an influential local religious leader, the Ayatollah Tahiri. After the revolution, he connected to us revolutionaries and then became the middleman between us and the Ayatollah Tahiri. Ayatollah Tahiri led the religious men of the garrison, including myself, to meet Ayatollah Khomeini in Qom. Qom is the religious shrine where the Ayatollah Khomeini trained and first announced his opposition to the Shah in 1963 for the Shah's intolerance and friendliness towards America and Israel. The Ayatollah Khomeini chose Qom as his residence after the revolution because he promised Iranians that he and the mullahs would not get involved in politics but only attend to religious affairs. Khomeini's close companions, such as the Ayatollahs Rafsanjani and Khamenei, his successor, and a few others caused him to change his mind, and he later moved to Tehran. When we met Khomeini, we assured him of our zeal to convert Iran into a radical Islamic country, and that we were also ready to build the army of Allah, the Hezbollah, to establish the rule of Islam in Iran and abroad. Some of us, however, did not know the real meaning of Islamic rule practically. The Ayatollah Tahiri was our spokesman, and through him we tried to convince the Ayatollah Khomeini that we were skilled military men, ready to teach Iranians fighting techniques and terrorist and suicide tactics in order to send them to conquer and destroy all infidels, including Israel and the United States. The Ayatollah Tahiri was the most powerful mullah in Isfahan at that time, gaining his religious popularity in the typical manner. He was also one of the most influential religious leaders in Iran because he had amassed so many followers. Every clergy who becomes an Ayatollah has the authority to accumulate his own followers or imitators. His popularity meant that he had a say about everything in Iran, and his opposition could be very costly to both secular and religious leaders, especially to those who wanted to ignore his power. The Shah of Iran lost his power and the support of his people to Muslim clerics because of their great influence over the people throughout the kingdom of the Shah. The Shah aimed to lead people to adopt a Western lifestyle, but he did not know how to deal with Islam, which was against Western democracy. The mullahs took advantage of people's ignorance and stirred them against the Shah. Shortly after the revolution, however, the ruling Islamic government also lost much of its influence and popularity with Iranian citizens. Some of the more prominent Ayatollahs of the country were being ignored by the new ruling authorities. These Ayatollahs, who had many followers, criticized the government in the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Ayatollahs even went so far as to condemn the new regime's activities as anti-Islamic. However, the Ayatollah Tahiri led us to Qom with the underlying motive to spread the subtle news that Islam was a political religion and its mullahs more than secular people who ought to be active in politics and the Islamization of Iran and the world. This contradicted the early promise of the Ayatollah Khomeini, who had promised the separation of church and state in government. The Ayatollah Tahiri and other influential mullahs knew that the Ayatollah Khomeini had used the Islamic doctrine of taqiyya, the pious deception, to hide his plan for theocracy since the start of the revolution. He did this to incite people against the Shah in order to attain power. Now, he was in power and needed the mullahs, like Tahiri, to prepare the minds of the majority secular-minded people for the mullahs' takeover. The Shah had fled the country by this time, and Khomeini's partisanship against the Shah was no longer enough to yoke us to Khomeini. He had to use different, deceptive tactics not only to protect himself from the consequences of his lies, but also to establish a law to punish those of us who did not want to tolerate them. The mullahs started to raise their voices, saying that without the political leadership of the Ayatollah Khomeini, the country might descend into chaos. Subtly and progressively, they convinced many Iranians that not only did the Ayatollah Khomeini deserve to be the supreme political leader in Iran, but also the sovereign leader, the Vilayet Faqih, who would have absolute right over every citizen and indeed everything in Iran. While the radical mullahs were busy establishing themselves in Iran, another prominent clergyman, Ayatollah Hassan Lahuti, was working to establish a revolutionary army. Iran already had a powerful army, but Muslim leaders did not trust the commanders of an army who had once sworn their allegiance to the Shah. Also, a majority of army officers were trained as patriots in order to love their country and protect it against its enemies. Such patriotism is rejected in Islam. If a country is not ruled by Islam, both national pious Muslims and foreign pious Muslims have the right to attack secular Muslim patriots and capture the country. That is why so many committed Muslims in the world are in one way or another linked to Palestinian leaders and the Hezbollah. These radical Muslim groups were able to Islamize their people rapidly, destroy nominalism in their lands, and achieve great success in fighting against Israel. So for the Ayatollahs, the Muslim militias had to hold more power than the general army officers. Khomeini was also bent on taking over power in other countries, and this could only be accomplished through the establishment of a radically zealous band of fanatical Muslims, Hezbollah. As a result, the Ayatollah Lahuti called on the Ayatollah Tahiri to help him seek out skilled soldiers who also happened to be religious zealots. The Ayatollah Tahiri contacted Colonel Shirazi and asked him to take part in their plan to build this new army and to encourage like-minded Muslims to join up. Finding favor. Because of our religious zeal, I and another garrison companion had earned a good reputation and were invited by Colonel Shirazi to accompany him to Tehran to establish a new revolutionary army with the Ayatollah Lahuti. We prepared ourselves and departed from Isfahan to Tehran. We were delayed in leaving when the Ayatollah Tahiri said we had to wait because there was tension between the mullahs surrounding the Ayatollah Khomeini and the Ayatollah Lahuti over the establishment of a revolutionary army. The mullahs, such as Rafsanjani, Beheshti, and Khamenei, the present Grand Ayatollah and successor of the Ayatollah Khomeini, did not want the Ayatollah Lahuti to be in charge of establishing the revolutionary army because they did not view him as sufficiently radical enough and in line with them. Revolutionaries are required to be emotionally indifferent, insensitive, and zealous to impose Islam on others at all costs. It seemed that the Ayatollah Lahuti did not possess enough of a terrorist mindset, nor did he seem willing to ignore the right of his fellow citizens in the name of the Islamic cause. Internal chaos. The Ayatollah Lahuti showed tolerance towards the existence of all other parties, even atheists, because he believed that unity among the existing groups would strengthen the country's stand against Israel and the Christian world. In contrast, the mullahs' disunity would not only hinder the spread of the revolution, but would also disarm its goals. The Ayatollah Lahuti's logic directly opposed Islam in that Islam seeks to triumph and eradicate all other beliefs. His problem was that he was more nationalistic than the Ayatollah Khomeini, who preferred the nomadic and hostile culture of Saudi Arabia. The Ayatollah Lahuti was also not in favor of killing his fellow citizens because of infidelity. His values sharply contrasted with the commands of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, who killed all his opponents in Saudi Arabia and only freed those who submitted to Islam and its army. The above-mentioned mullahs who opposed the Ayatollah Lahuti wanted to disarm him and remove him from any position or power, but he refused to step down. Soon after, he was mysteriously murdered. The injustices perpetrated by our revered leaders created tensions in Iran and disappointed and confused those of us who had contributed a lot towards the victory of the revolution and now were waiting to reap the fruits of our work. Alas, we were much younger, less experienced, and unaware of the bitterness of Islamic politics. We did not have a proficient knowledge of Islamic history. We had history courses, but these covered only a limited selection of subjects. We had not been taught that Arab emirs, caliphs, and Safavid, Afshar, and Qajar dynasties who ruled over Iran had degraded Iranian culture and persecuted their opponents and non-Muslims for the sake of radical Islam. We were raised to be largely illiterate concerning the political philosophies of the various Muslim groups in our history. Because of this, we were not able to discern the root of our country's problems, which was Islam. The Shah knew with Islam he would not be able to associate himself with the great kings of old, Cyrus and Darius. Instead, he put himself forward as a faithful Muslim to overcome the opposition of committed Muslims. He was not living according to the standards of Islam, but emphatically called himself a devoted Muslim. Because of his superficial proclamation, we were also calling ourselves Muslims proudly without knowing that Islamists hated our nation's democratic values. From the early grades, we were taught where the roots of our cultural identity came from and why we needed to be proud of it. However, we were never taught who had been posing threats to our national identity or what we needed to reject or embrace to protect our democratic values. These problems ran deep in our education and not only negatively affected us in making reasoned choices for our country's future, but kept us ignorant until we lost our country to its sworn enemies, the mullahs. The real enemy was hidden under political correctness. The strong values we adhered to, which kept the nation together, were vulnerable to the threats of Islam and eventually were belittled and dominated by Islamists. We felt confusion by the conflict between what we had perceived to be messages of democracy, peace, and hope for Iran, and what we were seeing after the revolution. Not only were the revolutionary mullahs eager to slaughter non-Muslims, but even their own devoted Muslim colleagues who opposed them. The swift political rise of the mullahs, which deprived their opponents of opportunities to react, incited hostile rejection. We were perplexed to observe that even seemingly small matters could cause bloodshed between Muslim leaders. The contention among Muslim religious leaders spread quickly to other religious and non-religious groups, and even to our military forces, causing widespread chaos. This chaotic atmosphere worked to the advantage of the mullahs, who knew that if they were to be successful in imposing Islam throughout Iran, they would have to create chaos first and then disarm their opponents quickly, no matter the costs. As a result, we were dismissed and exempted from fulfilling the remaining part of our 2-year commitment to the Iranian army. From Isfahan, I went to Tehran to find a suitable place to live and serve the revolution in my country if possible. The Ayatollah Khomeini had appointed Mr. Bazargan interim prime minister due to his popularity among the revolutionaries. However, he was not permitted to establish his cabinet members independently. Khomeini's close associates among the clergy put pressure on him and took part in his government despite their dislike of Bazargan's philosophy of running the country. Bazargan was a committed Muslim and the leader of the liberation movement, but the mullahs did not favor his nationalistic approach to governing the country. Even though they had junior roles in Bazargan's government, they gained more power than him due to their close relationship with Khomeini. They knew that it would not be easy for them to have major governmental roles over freedom-loving people. They took less important roles in order to change the atmosphere first, paving the ground for dominance in the future. They were clever enough to use Bazargan's milder philosophy as a channel for penetration and destruction so that in time they could establish their own theocratic government based on Sharia, the rigid Islamic principles. The seed of authoritarianism was sown during the time of Bazargan, and the battle for control won during the time of Dr. Bani Sadra. Both Bazargan and Bani Sadra knew how the mullahs betrayed the democracy pioneers in 1953, 26 years before the revolution of 1979, when the prime minister of that time, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh, stood against the foreign policy of the Shah concerning oil and forced him to leave the country. Bazargan himself was a part of the democratic movement and also a member of Dr. Mossadegh's cabinet. He experienced the mullahs' betrayals personally in the way they first supported Dr. Mossadegh, but later withdrew, so he lost to the Shah. It was sad that he and Bani Sadra forgot or wanted to forget what the mullahs did to our country, and in this way misguided us. We also believed that the mullahs would never again deceive their nation, but they did. They used new acts of deception to gain power progressively. They hid their intention to creating a despotic government behind the false promises of Khomeini to establish democracy. While speaking pro-democratic language, the mullahs subtly encouraged their followers, not more than 2%, to challenge authorities in every organization in order to weaken Bazargan's government and create anarchy to pave the way for taking power. The students they controlled challenged their professors in the universities and caused the universities to close. The employees they controlled challenged the business managers, and many businesses closed down. Their ordinary followers also interfered with the lives of rank-and-file people who were not committed Muslims or non-Muslims. They pressed on until they established the religious police to make sure Islam permeated society at all levels, and the principles of Islam, Sharia, were in practice everywhere. With the establishment of the religious police and the Revolutionary Army, the highly equipped and respected army was relegated to second-rank status after the Revolutionary Army. Threats to lovers of democracy started to rise after this. They were humiliated and beaten in the streets, and no one was able to protect them. The mullahs were paving the ground to create more anarchy for the soon-to-be-held election. They hoped to make it easy to get their representative into the newly established Islamic parliament. Bazargan's goal was to establish an Islamic version of democracy in Iran, believing that Islam favored democracy. Like so many of us, Bazargan also did not understand that with Islam, it is impossible to establish a democracy. We were zealous Muslims, but we did not understand Islam fully and were unaware of its incompatibility with democracy. We always had limited access to Islamic sources, being shielded from gaining insight into our religion. The mindset was to blindly cling to the mullah's advice about every matter in Islam. Non-clerics had no right to adhere to any opinion based on their own personal understandings, as this could promote apostasy. We therefore blindly followed the Ayatollah Khomeini. Like many others, I knew on the one hand that in a democratic environment, people would have the freedom to challenge, question, reject, or accept willingly. We learned from our studies in universities and from common sense that a perfect model of democracy does not use force. It is perfect because of its superior and practical values. All other models or beliefs will perish if that which is perfect is at work. On the other hand, I was also taught to believe Islam was the last and perfect religion, come to finish the incomplete works of other prophets before Muhammad. We expected that Islam's perfection would manifest itself in peacefulness, and that other religions would simply cease to exist because of Islam's irresistible attraction. We were taught that people in ancient Saudi Arabia rejected Islam since they did not know how to deal with perfect Islam. Allah had required an absolute allegiance to Muhammad without question since he was the prophet of the perfect Islam. They believed one had no place questioning the perfect. To challenge Islam or Muhammad carried a death sentence. The Ayatollah Khomeini's promise of freedom caused me, like many others, to believe that he would not force us to follow the ancient authoritarianism of Muhammad. Muhammad forced others to follow him because his contemporaries were ignorant or jahil and uneducated. We were educated and lived in an educated and civilized area, and we were able to listen, evaluate, and choose the best. The mullahs persuaded us of this before the 1979 revolution. The narrative changed, however, when the Ayatollah gained power after the revolution. Ayatollah Khomeini passed laws for anyone who rejected him, the one who was ruling in Muhammad's place, to be subjected to the same punishment which was applied in Muhammad's time. We all were transported back to Muhammad's ancient authoritarianism of the 7th century and treated like the ancient ignorant ones. Betrayed. The fanatical-minded mullahs expected all young Iranian revolutionaries to immediately assimilate to Muhammad's 1400-year-old Bedouin culture, which promulgated the belief that all other groups had to disappear. They believed that their party was the only Islamic party to have the right to exist. Only the party of Allah, Hezbollah, will triumph, so the Quran says, and we were expected to motivate our own countrymen to fulfill the commands of Muhammad against our own people. We were unable to connect what we believed about Islam with the reality we saw unfolding around us, so we began to blame the mullahs for the violence and dissension. Without ever knowing true Islam, we called it perfect and blamed the mullahs when things began to sour. We proclaimed that they could not be real followers of our perfect Islam, and it was they who had corrupted its teachings. This blame game is still a big problem for Muslims, because they're quick to accuse other Muslims of fanaticism and terrorism without knowing that Islam itself promotes this very behavior, and it is this ignorance which causes violence and hostility between Islamic factions. We were revolutionaries, but our faith and minds were shaped by a royal culture that respected other beliefs and values. Iran, or Persia, was the country of great kings who respected the beliefs of all tribes and nationalities in their kingdom, and they left this legacy for Iranians to pass on from generation to generation. Prior to the revolution, no one imagined that other political parties would be suppressed under the rule of the Ayatollah Khomeini. He promised that all groups would have the freedom to run their own campaigns after the revolution. He even stated that the governing system in Iran would be based on the decision of people by a referendum. He never spoke of a system that would be governed by Islam. He made it very clear that mullahs would take no part in politics. They would only be allowed to teach spirituality. The Ayatollah Khomeini knew that Iranians were an educated people who would not trust relatively uneducated mullahs. He kept his motives and plans well hidden, knowing that he would lose the people's trust and confidence if he showed his true intentions and possibly deny himself victory. Those mullahs in league with him never spoke against his statements before the revolution, knowing he was working to deceive Iranians and the world. The mullahs rushed into government offices, occupying political positions immediately after the revolution, making it difficult for the interim secular government to function. The interim prime minister, using an Iranian idiom, once said, "Ayatollah Khomeini entrusted the sword to us, but we have the handle of the sword. The edges are in the hands of the mullahs." He was trying to say that the Ayatollah's colleagues acted as obstacles in his government, making it difficult for him to use his autonomy. The mullah's takeover of government positions was the opposite of what the Ayatollah Khomeini had promised to Iranians before the revolution. Khomeini not only kept quiet, but supported the mullah's siege of the government, shocking many revolutionaries who trusted him. He exploited our zealous loyalty to himself, and because of this he destroyed our trust in him and the mullahs surrounding him. As a result, our hopes for a free Iran were dashed. Why would a grand leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini, lie to millions? He was only doing as the Quran had instructed. He was allowed to lie under certain circumstances in order to gain power for the establishment of the real Islam. Before the revolution, people thought the Ayatollah's entry to Iran would end 1,400 years of conflict between Iranian and Saudi Arabian cultures. They also thought that they would have the opportunity to serve their country as Iranians. But in reality, he was secretly working to give priority to Muhammad's Arabian culture and language. His lies were a huge burden on Iranian Muslims who did not want to be yoked to Muhammad's 7th century nomadic culture. In 1,400 years of battle, the Iranian culture lost little to Arabian culture. Now the Ayatollah Khomeini, a righteous Muslim, came with the most deceptive principles of Islam to put an end to the remnants of Iranian culture. This became an issue of dispute among many Muslim revolutionaries. Was our priority to be Iranian first or Muslim first? Like many others, I was caught in this dualistic war, struggling with what would be my identity, Iranian or Arabian. Should I be Iranian first and then Muslim, or vice versa? We wish the Ayatollah Khomeini would stay faithful in his promises to Iranians so that Iran would not stray away from its historical roots. His lies caused us to lose face among many Iranians who accepted our call to support the Ayatollah Khomeini prior to the revolution. Lack of experience and our own busy revolutionary activities made us unable to evaluate whether or not the Ayatollah Khomeini would be able to lead us after the revolution. We never imagined that his great success in leading the revolution did not mean that he would be successful in leading the future government. We also did not realize that destroying government was much easier than building it. We were driven to place our whole focus on overthrowing the rule of the Shah and capturing the country. We had placed all eggs into the basket of learning the principles and practices of demolition and destruction. We did not have time to seek or evaluate the future or what principles were necessary for running a country. On the other hand, we did not have practical experience of participatory leadership practically. Political leadership in the Middle East was absolutely centralized because of Islam, and obedience was absolute. We were obligated to leave every decision to our top leader. There were some people who criticized the Ayatollah Khomeini before the revolution, challenging him with the accusation that he did not have any plan for a future government. His response, however, was that everybody had to focus on the destruction of the Shah's regime and leave the future to the future. His entire focus was only to paralyze the monarchy in Iran and make his way to the top. His deceptive leadership and our blind obedience ultimately led the country to catastrophe after the revolution. With the tensions and uncertainties facing us, I decided that it was best to bide my time before rushing to join a particular side. My desire to make an educated decision led me to attend meetings to strengthen my knowledge of Islam. The Ayatollah Dr. Morteza Motari was one of my favorite speakers, and my frequent attendance at his lectures gave me the opportunity to ask him for a solution to the tensions among Muslim leaders. Motari hated the tensions among leaders, as it was going to diminish the power of revolutionaries against Israel and the West. He said that Rafsanjani, Beheshti, and Khamenei were three of the most dangerous of all mullahs, and their intent was only to serve their thirst for power, and their ambition would subvert Iran's revolution. He also advised me to stay away from them. His advice confirmed my decision to hold off joining either side of the mullahs, even as tension between them grew daily. A public referendum was held to decide between a ruling system, a republican system, or some other form of government. Before the revolution, the Ayatollah Khomeini told the people of Iran that whatever they decided, he would bow to it. To the astonishment of many, he did not stay faithful to his promises yet again, but insisted on the establishment of the Islamic Republic of Iran rather than only the Republic of Iran. The addition of the word Islamic to the Republic of Iran meant that the country would be run under pure Islamic principles known as Sharia, which does not give rights to any other Islamic or non-Islamic groups. Rights were to be given to Hezbollah only, the militia of Khomeini. This would be at the cost of all other groups and result in bloodshed. Under the Sharia, every group thinks of itself as the only legitimate group of Allah and of others as illegitimate. Therefore, they must be destroyed. The history of these conflicts and bloodshed in Islam began immediately after the death of Muhammad, when his in-laws sparked the Sunni movement and his son-in-law the Shiite movement. Since that time, radical followers of these two schools of Islam have been slaughtering each other in the name of their faith. Now, the history of Islam would repeat itself with the rise of Khomeini, and the Islamic world was to witness bloodshed again.